We'll be starting the keynote in just a second. We're waiting for online participants to log in. Perfect. It's my great pleasure to be able to introduce Dave Robitaille today as our keynote speaker over the evening reception from IBM-Canada. Dave is the Director of Corporate Citizenship and Corporate Affairs. He's been with IBM for nearly 30 years now, currently leading the Corporate Citizenship, Canada's Corporate Citizenship Program, and the Corporate Social Responsibility Programs and Community Relations, and he works in a dynamic executive team focused on IBM's public and government relations, Indigenous affairs, and innovation strategy. Dave has great experience in both the public and private sectors, and throughout this discussion, he will give us a great overview of the history of IBM, looking forward, and great insights into the digital transformation from a very unique industrial perspective. So please welcome Mr. Dave Robitaille from IBM.
Thank you, Taylor. And thanks for having me and taking a bit of time out of your evening to be here. It's great to be here. I was saying that for some reason, when it comes to Halifax, I never get to stay over. I flew in this afternoon, going to speak, and I'm going to head right back to the airport. I've actually managed to lay my head on a pillow in Halifax once in my life, but someday I will stay for longer. But thanks again for having me. So as Taylor said, I've been at IBM for almost 30 years, and so I'm a bit of a dying breed around the place. And in fact, one of the reasons that I have to hustle back is that a bunch of people that I've worked with throughout my career are retiring at the end of June. So the month of June, I've kind of been going to retirement parties one after another, and there's a couple of them tomorrow, 2 different ones tomorrow that I got to get to, and in fact, I'm missing one today to be here. Just as a bit of family history, my father worked at IBM for 37 years before me. His career and mine overlapped by about 18 months, and IBM-Canada turned 100 last November, and between my dad and I, we have 60 contiguous years of the company's history under our belt, and both of my brothers and my sister, my brother-in-law, all worked at IBM at one time or another, so I think we have about 200 years of family history with the company. So I did want to start my remarks this evening actually talking a bit about the history of IBM, and I hope that you'll find that it rolls well into the body of what I'm going to talk about, which is our interest in education reform. And you'll see that we've, for the entirety of our company's history, not just been interested in selling things and making profits, but in fact making the world work better and being an integral part of the communities and the societies in which we operate. So I hope that through the process of telling some of the history that you'll find it somewhat entertaining. I hope you'll find out a few things you didn't know about IBM previous to tonight, and that you'll learn a bit about the distinctive culture of our company. So the IBM Corporation, the global corporation, was incorporated on June 16th, 1911 as the Computing Tabulating Recording Company. It was actually the amalgamation of 3 companies into one new corporation, and those 3 companies dated back into the 1880s. So we've been around for a long time. We've done a lot of things. In the earliest days of the company's history, we made things like punch card readers and time clocks for industry. We moved into things like cheese slicers and weigh scales, as we were incorporating. Those were the business machines of the day. Now, as I mentioned, IBM-Canada turned 100 last year. We were incorporated in Toronto on November 29th, 1917. And in fact, that was where the name IBM was first used. So IBM is in fact a Canadian brand that was first used as one of the earliest subsidiaries of the Computing Tabulating Recording Company. And then in February of 1924, CTR adopted the name IBM from its Canadian subsidiary. So these are facts I like to throw at my American bosses every once in a while to remind them that we were here first. And Canadians really have had the opportunity to put a real stamp on this iconic global brand of ours. Now, anybody who knows just a little bit about IBM will be familiar with the name Thomas Watson. So Thomas Watson arrived in 1914 as the president and CEO. He's viewed as the founder of IBM, but he wasn't actually there on day one. It was a financier in New York City whose name I don't even remember, who was the guy who really founded what is IBM today. But Thomas Watson was the person we view as the founder and the person who really created the culture of IBM as we know it. And interestingly, he's known throughout history in business schools as the greatest salesman that ever lived. And, you know, that could be a pejorative in some places, but he really was an interesting character who had strong beliefs, and more than 100 years later, many of those beliefs are still very, very evident in the way the company operates. So a lot of those beliefs largely present still today, primarily a company that's focused on discovery and of service to the world. So everything that we do has an aspect of why does this make the world better? How is this working towards the service of improving the lot of humanity? So he was also a man of great sound bites. And we've got a lot of them that many of them are still posted. If you ever have the opportunity to go around into an IBM office, you'll see some of these things that are said. One of his biggest beliefs was that all of the world's problems could be, and I'll air quote here, easily solved if people were only willing to think. And so that word think, if you ever go into an IBM office, you will see think all over the place. And though people from my generation and before actually have little signs on our desk that say think, right? And I'm not sure if they still produce those, but it's a really integral part of the culture that we've got. Extending from this, Watson also knew that when we began from a problem and worked our way outwards to a solution, markets would be readily made. And therefore, the research and development that we do as an organization is focused on solving the world's problems and understanding that when we find those solutions to those problems, there are already markets that are ready for them, which is somewhat antithetical in the tech sector in particular, because oftentimes tech innovation happens as, let's see if we can make it do that, and once we've made it do that, let's see if we can figure out how to sell it to somebody, right? And nowadays there's a lot of excitement about things like design thinking and user experience and empathy, but really those are new labels on the same idea of starting from the problem and trying to build a workable solution that you know will have a market at the end of it. Now, because of this focus, IBM continues to this day to be one of the world's largest R&D spenders. We spend about $6 billion US a year on research and development, and about 500 million of those dollars are spent right here in Canada. So we have research and development labs across the country, and we do some things that probably would surprise some people. Though IBM-Canada is one of the biggest software labs anywhere in the IBM world, and we operate in 178 countries on every continent. But in a little town called Bromont, Quebec, just south of Montreal, we actually build chips. We still manufacture chipsets here, not just in North America, but right here in Canada. And up until a few years ago, for those of you who have kids, all of the chipsets that powered all of the world's gaming systems were built in Quebec at that little factory that we have there. A town of fewer than 7,500 people that we had about 2,000 employees in a manufacturing plant there, one of the great secrets of the manufacturing world here. And in recent years, we've partnered with a bunch of other tech companies and the University of Sherbrooke to build a next generation chip manufacturing research center right there on our campus. So some things that would surprise people about the idea of that level of electronics manufacturing still being done in North America. Now, as a result of all of this focus on innovation and research and development, IBM has one of the world's largest patent portfolios, and we derive a great deal of income from licensing those patents every year. And for 25 consecutive years, right up to last year, 2017, we've led the world in patent creation every single year. And in 2017, we actually created more than 9,000 patents, and we crossed another milestone, which was more than 100,000 patents in the company's history. And as another little point of trivia, you think about some of the companies in the world who are considered the great innovators, you know, the people who make all the gadgetry and that sort of thing. They don't come close to us. And in fact, most of those 25 years, the next 10 companies behind us combined don't create as many patents as we do. So there's a very, very inventive place. Now, many of those patents, you wouldn't be surprised about things like hard drive technology, and in later days, things like cloud computing technology. Most people now are starting to become familiar with our Watson AI engines and things like that. But I thought I'd tell a few stories about our work that you probably didn't know and you might be surprised for. So, you know, our first patent was filed on July 25th, 1911. We didn't waste any time. It was just a month after we incorporated, we had our first patent for a perforating machine. Now, anybody who's done any work in tech, and it's funny because I started my career in manufacturing, and the legacy of IBM manufacturing, the 80-column punch card, is still an integral part of the culture of people of a certain generation. So punch card readers were started in the 20s and still in existence well into the 70s as a mode for coding, essentially, what we think of as coding today. So a perforating machine was actually a very important invention to us to build those 80-column punch cards that went on for decades. Now, Watson himself had a patent that he filed in 1930, and you'll love him for this, for the automated traffic signal. So whenever you're at a red light, you can think about IBM and you can think about Thomas Watson, and that was one of his gifts to the world and to you every time you're stuck behind a red light. And interestingly, today we're revisiting traffic flow using artificial intelligence. And so that simple patent from 1930, which was probably pretty complex at the time, is being revisited as how do we use artificial intelligence to optimize traffic flows today. And in several cities around the world, we're working with the city governments to help them optimize traffic flow using technology. Moving on to the 60s, although I'm not going to address an individual patent, IBM was instrumental in putting people on the moon and, importantly, getting them back to Earth safely. So we were right there in the lunar mission, the first one with Neil Armstrong walking on the moon. Now, another one I thought I'd throw in here, because today is actually an anniversary of this, is on October 7, 1952, IBM received the patent for the Universal Product Code, the humble barcode that's on a lot of products. But it wasn't until 1974, it was June 26, 1974, 44 years ago today, that a pack of Wrigley's gum was the first product ever scanned in a supermarket at a Marsh's supermarket in Troy, Ohio. And that technology has absolutely revolutionized the retail industry, the supply chain industry, the inventory control systems of the world. And again, those were inventions by IBM scientists. And I was telling Alana before I started talking that another interesting one, a scientist who still works at IBM today that I've had the opportunity to work with over the years, invented the excimer laser and had it patented in 1995. And this is the laser technology that is used in LASIK eye surgery. So these are the things that come out of our labs. So today we're obviously continuing to patent lots of things and to work on all kinds of research. We're working with our Watson AI platform, which we refer to not as artificial intelligence, but as augmented intelligence. Our philosophical viewpoint on it is that the machines are not there to replace humans, but they're to support human ingenuity in making better, faster, more effective decisions. You might remember Watson appearing on the game show Jeopardy about 7 years ago. And some people brush that off as some kind of a strange marketing shtick. It was a very powerful program for natural human language recognition. And where we've been able to put that to work in particular is building a database of all of the world's peer-reviewed medical journals and allowing doctors to make better, faster, more effective decisions on diagnoses. So in particular, we've got an interest in trying to find better outcomes for cancer patients using that technology. So with that as background, I'm going to tell you a little bit today about the organization that I work in IBM-Canada. So it's Innovation, Citizenship, and Government Affairs. And every corporation kind of organizes itself a little differently, and none of these pillars of this organization are unique to us, but the organization of them into one place is somewhat unique insofar as we're very interested in driving innovation, not just that we create, but that others create towards a greater goal. So in that particular pillar, we're very interested in the startup community. So here in Halifax, very recently, we made an announcement about a new startup garage that will offer IBM technology to startup companies to accelerate their growth and commercialization of products that will make it to market quicker. One of the things that motivates that for us in Canada is the fact that Canadians produce world-class research, but we're frankly miserable at commercialization and bringing it to market. And we underperform, and not just by a little bit, but by a lot of our global peer group. So we took upon ourselves about 10 years ago to build a program where we would actually start building incubators in public-private partnerships across the country. We now have IBM incubators in 7 cities. So one of them is here in Halifax. We have one in Montreal, one in Ottawa, one in Markham, where we're headquartered. So there's an actual startup incubator and accelerator right in the first floor of our headquarters in Markham, one in downtown Toronto, and one in Calgary. And the one that's interesting to people about the Calgary one is it's an actual joint venture with Arlene Dickinson from Dragon's Den. So that's the innovation part of our portfolio. I'll talk more in depth about citizenship because that's what I really do as my day job. But it's all brought together in the government affairs piece. And this is not about lobbying for policy to be to our advantage, but this is about ensuring that government officials understand the point of view that we've got about what's important in creating the foundation for not just IBM to be successful in the Canadian marketplace, but for the marketplace itself to be successful. And that's going to come back into this citizenship conversation. So where I spend a great deal of my time is in these 3 pillars. So we spend a lot of time on issues of education, and I will get into why, about resilient communities. So we do have to deal with, as a large global brand, being supportive of communities in terms of disaster preparedness, and our employees demand that we be involved when disaster strikes. About ensuring that we're operating responsibly, and we've got some pretty iconic examples of how IBM has taken a tremendous stand on issues of social policy in various places around the world. Last year in particular, we spent a great deal of time pointing out to state governments in the United States that we were prepared to cease operations in their state if they didn't snap out of their issue with transgender rights and the bathroom bills that were going across the nation. And those sorts of things go back deep into the history of the company. So during the 50s and 60s and the days of the human rights debates in the United States, we created company policies that were decades out in front of those things that became law, things like equal pay for work of equal value and non-discrimination policies and those things. And then at the social services level, we spend a great deal of time in our communities with our employees working with the nonprofit sector at primarily helping them to become more effective as businesses. We do fundraisings. One of the things I'm responsible for is the IBM Employees Foundation. So here in Canada, we raise about $2.5 million a year that's divided amongst about 1,800 different charities, and that's all at the employee's choice, which is big numbers and sounds exciting, but the more fundamental work that we do is working with the charitable sector to actually become more effective themselves. We essentially bring to them the same thing that we do in the commercial sector to make our customers more effective so that they can focus on their core business. And then I talked earlier about the work that we're doing in healthcare and bringing technology that we've invented for one person to bear on other things, to one purpose, pardon me. So why am I here today? I'm going to talk about an education reform program that we began several years ago to address what we saw coming more than a decade ago about a talent gap. So right here, right now, today in Canada, there are 200,000 tech jobs that not only are unfilled, they have no prospect of ever being filled. There isn't enough students coming out of the formal education system with the credentials required to actually take on these jobs. And that's a problem for us because we have hundreds of jobs in Canada that we can't find good candidates for, but our customers and our marketplace is having the same thing. So we stood back and we said, we have a choice here. You know, we could go grouse and moan at the authorities and say they're doing a terrible job at producing the skills we need, or we could go talk to them about ideas that we had to try to drive change into that, knowing that this was not something that was going to be changed rapidly, but was going to take a generational approach of rolling up the sleeves to get done. Interestingly, I mentioned we have this chip manufacturing plant in Bromont, Quebec, and we've got a research lab there focusing on that. And what we've noted is with all of the excitement about software development and app creation, the engineering schools are seeing a shift away from traditional material sciences and hardware manufacturing disciplines and into those software disciplines, which is actually creating a problem for Canadian engineering firms across the spectrum, because more students are choosing to go into sort of those hot sectors of software development and fewer are going into those more traditional engineering skills. Now, less is being built here in Canada, but more and more the advanced manufacturing sector requires higher levels of skill. So my father-in-law is a retired GM executive. He worked for 41 years. He started as a 16-year-old making asbestos brake pads in St. Catharines, Ontario. He worked for 41 years as an industrial engineer. Nowadays, you couldn't have that career. The level of expectation to get a job at a traditional company like General Motors is increasing dramatically as the number of jobs is shrinking at the same time. So, with that said though, there's many of these 200,000 jobs that we see being unfilled are jobs that can actually be filled with people who don't necessarily have four-year university or college degrees, but people who have a particular set of skills that we can move to more quickly. Now, it's interesting for me personally, I started my career almost 30 years ago at a point in time where IBM would no longer consider hiring anybody that didn't have a university degree. 5 years ago, most of the people that we hired had to have advanced degrees. Like 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been hired by IBM with the credentials that I had. And I should say, it's more like 10 years ago. And then 5 years ago, suddenly we made this dramatic shift to start considering different skill pathways. And the greatest example of that is actually right here in Bedford. We have a services center where 6 years ago, when we launched it, we had 90 employees in the province of Nova Scotia. And today we have more than 600 employees in the province of Nova Scotia. Through a public-private partnership with the government of Nova Scotia, the Nova Scotia Community College and Dalhousie University, we created a services center where we do have some engineers from Dalhousie, but the vast majority of the people that we hire are very young people who have taken a college course. Now, many of them may have had a university degree before, but we're actually interested in them because of the college credentials that they've got with a co-curriculum development between IBM and the college to build the skills on that we need. So that was a learning that we took from Canada, and we call these jobs new-collar skills. So when I started my career, I started in what would have been considered to be a traditional blue-collar job, and I now work in what's considered to be a white-collar job, but these new-collar skills are in the middle of that. They don't need advanced degrees. They're not necessarily in a traditional office environment, but they do require a level of skill. Now, the other thing that we're doing in this space is looking at the non-traditional pools of talent. So the tech industry in Canada is still very white, and it's still very male. And a statistic I'll share about IBM-Canada, we are about 71% male, 29% female. That needle has not moved in 40 years, despite all of the efforts. Now, what's changed in that mix is the women that work at IBM are in much more professional and high-skilled jobs. So 40 years ago, they would have been administrative assistants and those sorts of job roles. And today, about 45% of our senior executive staff in Canada is female, so it's actually heavily weighted at the top end. But it's getting women into the career paths that will lead to that that's proven to continue to be challenging for us. So some of the initiatives that we're working on in Canada, I mentioned this IBM STEM for Girls program. So myself, my staff travel the country literally all year long, working with school boards, working with girl-centric nonprofits on technology training for girls by women in environments that will get girls through that curve. And what we've recognized is that it's the grade 6, 7, 8 years that are the critical years. And that if we can get to those girls in grade 5, 6, and 7, we can inspire them that there's a place for them in the tech industry. And hopefully they will continue down the path of the educational streams that they need to continue on in order to participate in that part of the economy. Now, I'm going to spend most of the time today talking about this P-Tech program, which is a program, an alternative high school early college program that we started in the United States in 2011. And the lone example we've got of the success of that so far in Canada is just in September, we're just finishing the first year of a P-Tech-like school in a First Nation called Six Nations in southwestern Ontario, near Brantford. It's the first installation of P-Tech. I will actually be there on Thursday morning to do the first year review and start to prepare for year 2. Now, that cohort that began there this year was 35 grade 9 students, 29 of whom are on reserve members of the Six Nations Band, and interestingly, 6 are non-Aboriginal students from Brantford whose parents chose to put them in that program, and I'll get into more about what the program is. But that grade 9 cohort is coming to an end, and next year they will go into the grade 10 cohort, and we'll bring in about 50 new grade 9 students and build into a 6-year cohort. So, about P-Tech. We started this program in Brooklyn, New York, with a single school in 2011, and the historian in me wants to talk about another sort of urban legend that's actually true. Our CEO at the time, a guy named Sam Palmisano, was entertaining the commissioner of the New York City Schools Commission, or the chancellor, pardon me, at a US Open tennis match and bemoaning this very skills talent gap that we were talking about. And the commissioner said to him, well, we've got neighborhoods full of kids who have no prospects, and you've got thousands of jobs going unfilled. How do we put those two things together and ensure that we skill those kids to fill those jobs you've got? And Sam literally came back to the office and visited my boss with a napkin and said, I committed us to this, go figure out how to build this thing. So that was in 2010, and in September of 2011, we opened that first P-Tech school in Brooklyn. So, the educators in the room, it's a 6-year program. We graduated theoretically the first class in June of 2017. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had the second graduating class, but we'll get into some interesting stories about what's actually transpired with those kids that began. So we now have more than 80 of these schools operating in the United States. By the end of this year, meeting in September when the school system opens, we'll have 122 in the United States, and we've got 7 in Australia, a few in Morocco and Thailand, but largely this is not expanded outside of the United States just yet, but that's what my boss tells me my job is to do here in Canada. Now, also interesting is this is very much not just an IBM thing. So when we built this model, we invited our industrial peer group in to do this with us, including many of our competitors. So you'll see the school in Queens is SAP. Well, we compete very vigorously against SAP in certain spaces, and I didn't put it on the board here, but Cisco has a school in Chicago, and Cisco is a company that in the data center environment we compete against very vigorously. But one of the joys of my job is I get to be church and not state, and that I can actually go and talk to my peers at those competitive companies and talk about how we raise all boats with some of our ideas. Now, to that end, we can't solve all these problems ourselves, and a lot of people, will pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I got an idea. Please come and help us," or "I love that P-Tech idea. Can you build one with me here?" And the answer is, we just can't do it everywhere. So, in the spirit of that sort of open source, to use a coding term, we created a playbook that's out on the web that anybody can access. So at ptech.org, you can download this playbook and see how we did it. So the design of the process, what it's aimed to do, and how it might work in anybody's particular geography. So this is probably the most important slide of the whole presentation regarding P-Tech. So P-Tech is a brand in and of itself. It may be a somewhat inelegant brand, but it stands for Pathways in Technology Early College High School. That's what the acronym stands for. IBM's famous for its acronyms. Our name is an acronym, and we're not terribly creative with our acronyms either. But the six tenets here are the things that make P-Tech P-Tech. So it must have a school district, a higher education party, and an industry partner. When we started in Brooklyn, we were had our IBM glasses on, and we were saying, well, we have thousands and thousands of employees in the New York area, so it makes sense for us to sort of adopt this school as an IBM school. But in many places, we don't have that circumstance. Here in Canada, we have about 3 cities where we have enough employees that we could even conceive of adopting a single school like that. Most places, we have branch offices with 100 to 300 employees in them. And the reason that's important is because on point number 3, each and every student gets an individual industry mentor for the entirety of their stay at the program, whether it be 6 years or less, depending on how they progress. So it is a 6-year program, and Canadian educators and administrators in particular sort of recoil at this idea when I bring it to them, because I'm of the generation that there was grade 13 when I went through school, and people worked really hard to get rid of grade 13 and did so successfully in most places. And now we're saying, well, no, we want to not only bring back grade 13, but grade 14 on top of it, right? And people go, oh my, the politics around that are pretty extreme. But the idea behind it is it's designed to be a 6-year program, and because the target students are students that normally may not even finish high school, let alone go on to post-secondary, it's designed to be very supportive of that student to keep them in an environment where they can be successful and actually get through the post-secondary portion of the program. And that's why we do the 9 to 14 model. Now, the importance of the higher education partner is the credentialing itself is critical. So as much as we say, we don't necessarily hire people for their credentials anymore as much as we do for their capabilities. We all know the credentialing is still a critical aspect of the student's journey. And so they need to exit this program not just with their high school diploma, but with an industry recognized credential from the post-secondary that allows them to be hired with marketable skills. Now, they can stay for the whole 6 years, and this is where I'll get back into some of the interesting experience we've had, but each student actually progresses on mastery, not on time served. And the first experiment in Brooklyn, we actually had an opening cohort of 98 students in September of 2011. 6 of them finished in 4 years. So they graduated as 18-year-olds, with both their high school diploma and a 2-year, what's referred to as an associate's degree in New York. And IBM had guaranteed the graduates of that school jobs at IBM, or job offers upon graduation. So now we had 18-year-olds with college degrees that we were offering jobs to. Interestingly, of those first 6, 3 of them accepted the jobs, and that's 3 years ago now. They're still working with us at IBM. 3 of them declined the job offers because one of them got a scholarship offer to Stanford, and the other 2 chose to go on to do full bachelor's degrees at NYU. So they didn't actually accept our job offer. That opening cohort for Brooklyn, which is the best sample set we've got thus far, 25% of the students actually graduated before the 6-year limit that we theoretically set on that. So the other things that we as the industry partner bring to that is each student gets an individual mentor. So in that Brooklyn example, it's an IBM mentor, but in the other schools that have a different industry partner, SAP, Motorola, General Dynamics, will have their employees mentor each student individually. They come and visit us. So the P-Tech school I mentioned in Six Nations, we had a bunch of grade 9 kids who came 3 or 4 times to visit us during the school year. They actually got to spend 45 minutes in our boardroom with our CEO back in September, which was interesting to them, and he was a bit of an interesting fellow and made it a colorful visit for them. And our employees go to them, and we have one Wednesday a month where we go to the school and work with the kids on things like robotics and artificial intelligence kind of encoding curriculum that we've built for them. We teach them some of the basics because many of these kids come from families that are multi-generational families on social welfare, and that they don't have role models close to them for even a college-going culture in their own family. They may not have anybody close to them that gets up and goes to work every day. So we work with the kids on basic things like how to dress to go to work, how to be on time, how to behave in a meeting, how to make a presentation, those sorts of skills that they might not get from their normal life experience. Now, I mentioned earlier that, interestingly, in the Canadian example, we've got the open enrollment. So the school is actually just off reserve in Brantford, Ontario. It's in the former campus of Mohawk College that was in Brantford. Six Nations Polytechnic is a private college the reserve owns, the band owns. They acquired this property, opened what is essentially a public-private high school on the Ontario curriculum, but they opened the enrollment and they had 6 families from Brantford, non-Indigenous families, actually want their kids to go there. So now you have, when I was last there, I was able to witness non-Indigenous kids speaking Mohawk and Cayuga languages, because those are in part of the curriculum that's at that particular school. Now this is the next bullet down here. This is one that gets people a little wound up, a little nervous. The cost-free post-secondary degree. That's a big commitment from both the post-secondary partner and the governing body, the province in our case, to make that commitment. So I'm in discussions with 2 provinces right now about expansion of P-Tech to those provinces, and this is the point where they go sort of, ooh, we have to figure out how to waive the tuition for those students. Now, Ontario, prior to the election we just had several weeks ago, had committed to making tuition to post-secondary free for low-income families. They hadn't gotten to fully implementing that yet before the government changed, but we're going to give them that opportunity to do that now with the new government in this program. And then, as I said, the first in line for jobs at the industry partners. Now, I'll make a comment about industry partners here in Canada. Obviously in Toronto, where IBM's headquartered, we have thousands and thousands of employees. We could do one of these schools on our own, but most communities where we have offices, we couldn't possibly consider having a one-on-one mentor for every student, or all the workplace visits, or all that sort of thing. So we've created a model here where we have industry partner collaborative groups. So in the IT industry, each province has its own IT association, and all of the companies that roll up in those associations are starting to come on board to agree to be a consortium model of that industry partner. And we do have several examples of that in the United States as well, in smaller communities. All right. So, as I said, we launched this with a single school in 2011 on a theoretical 6-year program. We started to expand in 2012. We're now at this, closing in on 100 schools, but still only have a very, very small data set of students who have passed through the program successfully, about 150. We have some pretty impressive stats in terms of things like attendance records and achievement records on standardized testing. And each jurisdiction has its own standardized testing methods. So it's a little bit challenging to sort of say what's the real effect on those. But comparative to students who don't participate in this program, the results are impressive. And considering that most of the students who enter this program were students that were at very, very high likelihood to not complete high school, let alone college, the early results are heartening that what we've created is on the right path. And now the challenge is how do we scale this into the system to realize broad benefits across the spectrum. Like I said, many of the students have graduated early, and the impact that has on them personally and on their families is obviously pretty profound. I mentioned those 3 students who graduated first at the P-Tech in Brooklyn. We offered them jobs with a starting salary of $53,000 US. These were kids who came from families that couldn't conceive of making those kind of incomes. One of those students has actually since moved from from Brooklyn, where he grew up, to our office in Atlanta. So in addition to the economic benefit, he's starting to get that experience of what it means to have a career in a global corporation and move around a bit and experience other places. I get the chance a couple of times a year to go visit that particular school in Brooklyn, because most of the Canadian people I talk to about this program, when they get excited enough, that's the school they want to go see. And that school has done an excellent job now as actually acting as the sales agent, if you will, for the program itself. And whenever I talk to the students at that school, it's amazing, for us as middle-class Canadians, how mobile we are. Most of those students live within a kilometer of the school and have never been outside of Brooklyn. Some of them may have gone into Manhattan, but aside from that, they've never been anywhere in their lives. So now we're creating these opportunities for these kids to actually go work in new cities. So it is a very, very complex program. The reason that it hasn't expanded more rapidly is because the complexities of each jurisdiction and the governance around it, coupled with, the fear of change, I'll say it that way, at the administrative and government levels. I've met with provincial premiers who physically recoiled at the idea of corporations having any kind of involvement in the public education system. So we've got a lot of work to do in socializing the benefits of the program and how corporations can actually be trusted to have the best interest of the students and the system at heart, in addition to trying to create the conditions for our marketplace to improve and thrive as well. So this is a bit of an eye chart. The point of it is, just like that comment I made about historically us being focused on the problem, this is all about being focused on the student and creating opportunity for students at an individual level and a group level to participate in the jobs of the 21st century, what will become the middle class, better paying jobs of the 21st century, and getting them ready for those things and all of the different players that are involved in that. So, sort of cutting to the chase of how do we do this, once we get agreement from the governing bodies that we want to pursue this, we have a steering committee process, much like we would have in lots of different nonprofit or or other public sector elements to bring all the players to the table and agree on a governance framework and the development path to get us there. There's, the logistical challenges of identifying a school, the dedication of school leadership. I can't underscore how critical the principal is in making this a success. It's a very, very different model. It's not the sort of thing where you just pick a principal who's been good one place and hope they're successful in this. They really have to have a change mentality and a change mindset in order to be able to be successful in this. Similarly with the teachers, the program itself is more intense, it's longer. So for the individual classroom educators, I always say this with trepidation because I'm married to a primary school teacher, but they have to be kind of a different sort of teacher to be in this school program. But the school boards are usually pretty adept at understanding who the right people are in order to make this work. And then, the skills mapping, and I've got a couple of real, eye charts for you later on, and on the process we go through to say, we're not just there to create a student who, hopefully will be successful in the tech sector if we get them through this. We start with, what are the jobs going to be in 5 years? And what are the curriculum elements that will build the right capacity in those students to be at that level in 5 years? And nowadays that's becoming more and more challenging to do. Like the type of software and technology products that are in the market today will be long gone and forgotten 5 years from now. How do we predict what those things are going to be and create not necessarily the specific skills in that student to address what might be in 5 years, but create the broad resilient skills in that student to move with the times. And I've watched in my own career, particularly in the software world, where what's hot today is cold tomorrow and gone the day after that, and people who were superstars because they had a particular skill set are on the street 2 years after they were being celebrated. And that's probably the biggest challenge. I mentioned at the beginning, I'm probably one of a dying breed, having been at IBM almost 30 years, because it's very, very challenging to keep a set of skills up to actually stay in one place for that level of time. And so the resiliency and the continuous learning are amongst the key skills. So I think, I've got to wind it up here in order to get to the Q&A portion. These are a bunch of the things I just addressed in the last chart. This is a little bit about what the student themselves will experience along the way. And again, from my point of view, or from our point of view, what we bring to it is starting the kids earlier, much, much earlier, with real world work experience, particularly for those students who don't have the luxury of having a parent or somebody close to them that can show them those ropes. So getting them from grade 9 into professional workplace environments and teaching them what it's like to be there, and then continuing that coaching and mentoring. Where's the one I want to get to here? I talked longer than I thought I would. So this is what a sample 6-year curriculum looks like for a P-Tech school. And so the educators in the room will probably recognize the format and the inputs to this. This is the stuff that we do in the year prior to even launching. So when that parent signs their grade 8 student up to join a school in grade 9, they will know what the next 6 years of that student's life looks like and the things that they will be studying for 6 years. There's some flexibility in the curriculum, but it's a fairly rigid curriculum in terms of, the streams of study. Now it meets, of course, all of the jurisdictional requirements for high school. And the other important aspect of this is it's not consecutive. So I mentioned students graduating on mastery and students graduating earlier than 6 years. That's because they start taking college courses at grade 10. So they do a fairly normal grade 9 course load, and by grade 10, they're already starting to do their college course load at the same time as their high school course load, and that's what enables them potentially to graduate early. So I think I'll call it there, because Taylor said there may be some interest in asking some questions, and I'm pretty close to time. So, yes, absolutely.
This was really fascinating, but I'm wondering how students elect to be in the program. Is there some kind of threshold that they need to meet? Is it competitive? Does everybody get to participate who wants to? How does that work?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking it. So on a previous slide, I mentioned open enrollment, but I probably didn't describe open enrollment. I went to the cultural piece of it. The open enrollment's open enrollment, which means there's no criteria, no entrance criteria. We do find, of course, because of the types of students that we're actually interested in attracting, that most of them are academically behind, and we need to work more intensely to remediate them as early as possible to keep them progressing forward. But there's no academic criteria for them, and that open enrollment is across the spectrum. So it's really up to the parent to decide that they want their student in that program, for sure. Other questions? Thanks.
I think this is amazing work, so thank you.
Oh, thank you. I wish I could take credit for all of it myself, but.
Okay. So I guess it speaks to the demand that we have private sector so engaged in training. So it's not just great companies like IBM, but also Google and lots of big name companies are involved in offering training of different sorts, sometimes online training, certification. But it's, I work at Statistics Canada, and it's about how do we measure? I mean, we need to be able to report the fact that all this is happening, and that the traditional school system is either is being changed by something like this, or is not able to keep up. So we have this other stream of training available. And is there any thought for some kind of industrial standards of credentials? Because there's also, as somebody earlier mentioned, there are also scams,
Yep, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, in our industry in particular, there are lots of academic credential standards and bodies that measure, and certifications that are recognized across the industry, and they may be vendor specific, like you've got those sorts of things. We haven't gotten yet to the point of saying some of the what we're now kind of referring to as the power skills, right? Like there's lots of people who have those hard skills or the set certifications, but not a set of standards for things like resilience or creative problem solving, I think.
It's not just that. It's about having an industry-wide standard for saying, with this kind of education, like you would in a community college or whatever.
Yep.
If you get this kind of, you become an electrician, you can do this kind of work.
Right. Yeah. So we're very, very much in our infancy in this here in Canada. The school in Six Nations, they have a private college on reserve, but the credential is actually backed by Mohawk College. And those students that started in grade 9, we haven't still certified the program at Mohawk. Mohawk's creating a new certification that those kids will exit with, but it hasn't gotten through the provincial process for credentialing, and it's been more than a year that we've been on that path. More broadly, I have touched on, the non-traditional pools of talent, and I talked about, in particular, in the tech industry, women being dramatically underrepresented, and here in Canada, we also have a dramatic underrepresentation of Indigenous people in the tech industry. This is something I've worked on for about 15 years, working with Indigenous communities across the country, trying to inspire their students to consider these types of industries to go in, because again, the arch of their experience is such that they, if they make it through high school and go on to post-secondary, gravitate to a number of industries that are non-tech. So we're in there, working with kids at like grade 3, 4 in Indigenous communities, trying to introduce them to technology. 15 years ago, many of these communities didn't have any type of technology. They're slowly but surely coming online that way, but they still don't, in many places, have an idea that the tech industry is an option for them. And where this comes back into your question is, I had the opportunity on the 13th of April to co-chair a roundtable with the Minister of Indigenous Services, and we had a bunch of my industry peers in the room talking about how do we take what we've done in Brantford and replicate that to many other Indigenous communities across the country. So there are those conversations happening right now. We didn't get into it in the context of creating a set of standards, but I don't think that'll be very far behind. It's kind of, how do we do this first to start getting the outcomes that we need to get, and then as we go, start to try to figure out how to standardize on those recognized credentials. Yeah, so.
This is a very interesting model that you're presenting to us. I'm just wondering on how to reconcile. We know that kids lose an interest in science, STEM at grade 4, and they drop off the map. And then I'm looking at the curriculum. I'm seeing algebra, chemistry, physics. How do you keep these kids engaged and looking at this curriculum and saying, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
And then what's the failure rate and what does that look like?
That's a great question. So as I said, we still have a relatively small sample size, and the only sample that we have that we can draw off of is a US sample. So we would compare the failure rate of students in the P-TECH system that we've got, and keeping in mind that most of the schools are within the last 2 or 3 years, so the numbers are still relatively low. But comparing them to the local or state failure rates, the outcomes are dramatically higher. And those are measured partially on failure rate, but it's attendance rate that's the real key measure, because the kids actually are showing up to school. What we can't change, of course, is these are the building blocks of STEM careers. So the challenge is not, how do we avoid forcing a kid to take algebra? It's how do we make algebra more engaging for the kid? And that's where I think the one-on-one mentorship, the capstone project, the industry mentorship, the workplace visits, that's the part that's engaging the kids and keeping them going. So they're actually seeing that there's something at the end of it. So I don't know if algebra will ever be more interesting to, I have a math degree, so I think algebra is awesome. But I respect the fact that not everybody thinks that way. But the challenge is not in making algebra awesome, it's in making the kid feel like there's a reason why I'm doing this, and there's something at the end of this that's worth pursuing and worth doing the work for. Now, and like I said, parents continue to have a great deal of influence in it, and on that one chart I said was the most important one, the bottom bullet was, guarantees of first in line for jobs at industry partners. That's pretty attractive to most parents, right? It's not very often you get to send your kid to a grade 9 program saying that 6 years from now you'll get a job with a Fortune 500 company if you make it through this. But it will continue to be one of the great challenges.
Potentially disadvantaged population and making this.
Yeah, that's right. Like when you take parents of grade 8 students and you say, if you put your child in this program and they make it through this program, which so far the early statistics say the overwhelming majority, it's north of 98%, make it through this program, we will offer them a job at IBM or SAP or General Dynamics, those kinds of companies, right? That's pretty attractive to the parent. Other questions?
Principal and teachers too, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. this is amazing what you're able to do. I also understand that you need a high level of engagement of your partners, either from the school or from the industry community. So I understand that you are looking for at a different model in Canada using a consortium of industry partners. My question for you, it is really for you because you have been in IBM for 37 years, a very innovative company. And we now do the correspondence between you stay 5 years in one company and then you go somewhere else and we are recruiting the best talent, etc. How have you been able to continue to evolve in this company and still be relevant and resilient? And yeah, I'd like to know about you.
Okay. First of all, it was my dad who was there for 37 years. I haven't got there yet. I'm coming up on 30, but and I did start when I was 9 years old. I think one of the big differences, and this is, I've been fortunate to work for an organization that actually takes that very seriously. So people development is, as a tenet of the company itself, is important. So I haven't done the same thing for 29 years at IBM. I started in manufacturing. I literally packed boxes and drove a forklift for the first couple of years of my career. But I was given the opportunities as I learned more and performed effectively to try new things. And that's a cultural thing. It's not unique to IBM, but it's, I think, unique to a relatively small number of companies. And I won't defend the corporate world for their behavior and their treatment of employees at this particular moment in history. I think we all know that, companies used to hire people for life, and that's much less the case now. But at the same time, employees used to join companies for life, and it's much less the case now. So I've had the opportunity, throughout my career, I begged that my bio not be read aloud while I was here because, I don't know, it just is uncomfortable when I'm sitting there and it's a long bio. It talks about lots of different things that I've done. But, I had the chance to start in manufacturing and learn about process management and customer service as foundational elements, and then move on to roles where I was doing strategic planning and working in finance, and then moving into management. And ultimately, I became responsible as a plant manager and then responsible for all of IBM's supply chain in Canada, which meant I was doing a lot of outwardly focused work on government relations as it pertained to import and export policies that the country was setting. So I had all these wonderful opportunities. Some of it, I would look back and say, gee, I was lucky. Some of it, I was in the right place at the right time. But I think the biggest element to it is I work for a company that actually takes that sort of thing seriously. It's something that we need to figure out societally from an employment point of view, how we get back to having companies that want people to stay for long periods of time. I think we're at this uneasy point in our history where people, although they're the greatest asset most companies have, they're also the greatest risk most companies have, right? And that's what engenders that behavior of people not staying long, whether they choose not to or the company chooses not to have them stay long. So I don't have a great answer for how we fix that. My own experience is largely based on working for a great company that actually takes that sort of thing seriously and lets people do many different things. So I would say to you that I've probably have what account for at least 5 different unique careers, but under one roof. I mean, we're a company of almost 400,000 people in 178 countries. So any vertical of the business process you can imagine, we've got it. And the people I work with, you'd be amazed at the academic credentials of the people that I work with. And that's what, allows for those discoveries that I talked about at the very beginning. You wouldn't think about somebody inventing laser eye surgery at IBM or or things like that, but we're able to do those things because of the breadth of credential and talent and interest that we've got amongst people. Thank you for the question.
I'm looking at this curriculum and thinking that it doesn't look all that different than my high school and undergraduate curriculum. But you talked about how you have a culture of getting patents and innovation. Our discussion here is about skills for the future and where we're going as an economy. How does IBM and how does this program help prepare your workforce for the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you're right. What we find, though, in our study is that fewer and fewer students are actually taking this curriculum. So left to their own in high school, they will not go to these things. We can prove statistically that we had an apex of STEM-related academic achievement leading up to the year 2000. So for those of us in the tech industry, like that was the great boogeyman, was the world going to end on January 1st, 2000, right? And as a result of that, and the result of about a decade of worry about that, we actually managed to show an uptick in STEM-related skills. Interestingly, there were more women graduated in STEM-related disciplines in 2000 than in 2015 in this country, because there was that burning platform sort of problem that people wanted to go off and try to attack. So no, this is not terribly unique as a curriculum goes, but the idea behind it is focusing people on the fact that there's not just a societal need to produce more of this talent for the good of society, but there's actually a benefit to the student to pick the right curriculum path to qualify for an industry that will provide the middle-class jobs of the 21st century, right? So if this were the 1970s or the 60s, you didn't necessarily have to take grade 12 algebra to get a job at General Motors and have a nice middle-class life, but nowadays you do. So that's really all it's addressing. And to the other point of the 21st century learning, that's really the workplace experience part of it, and it embeds it into the high school / college experience as there's a real world outside the bubble of the educational experience, and that the student has to be prepared for that.
Well, thank you very much for providing a unique insight into a solution of what many would call an intractable problem. So what I'd like to do is invite Amy Mifflin-Sills up from the Rito Hall Foundation, whose work on promoting innovation culture and lifelong learning is an important part of fostering digital skills and readiness for the workplace of tomorrow. So Amy would like to present you with a copy of Ingenious, which highlights a history of Canadian innovations, which I think you'll appreciate as a resident historian. Thank you very much again for your time. It's been quite insightful.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'll have this read by the time I get back. Thanks very much. And remember, all the world's problems can be solved. So you just got to think.
Oh.
Thank you.
So that wraps up today's events. We'll meet back here tomorrow morning, registration 8:30 to 9. Thank you all so much for staying.
Thanks again. Appreciate it. Sorry, but, great honor.